strange way to end a book, right? Like, that's it. That's the end of the story of Jonah. The story of Jonah ends, and God gets the last word, and the last word is a question. I've really been excited about this week. Jonah is, I think, one of my favorite Bible stories. It's a very, I think, important Bible story for the world we live in. So, before we jump in, did anybody have anything that stood out to you that you noticed in the story that you just want to share? Yeah, Adam. Okay, the number of days. Yeah, those numbers appear a lot in the Bible, right? 3 days, 3 nights, 40 days, 40 nights. Jesus actually references this story when he talks about his own death. The religious leaders ask for a sign, and Jesus says, the only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah, which is being swallowed up for 3 days, right? Yeah, numbers are important in the Bible. Anybody else? Part of the story that stood out to you that you just liked or thought was weird? All of it? Yeah, it's kind of an odd story. So let me begin with, this story is a problem for a lot of people. And it's a problem for a lot of people in a different way than the flood story is a problem for a lot of people, right? The flood story is a problem because it's about genocide, right? So that's a problem. What I often find with people in this story is people decide, they usually set up their positions in one of two camps. One camp is that they say, you mean I'm supposed to believe a dude got swallowed by a fish? Seriously? Like, that's what you want me to believe in the year 2018, that a dude got swallowed by a fish, was in there for 3 days, and then got vomited back up on a beach. That's what you want me to believe. And you say, sure. And they're like, nope, totally out, right? How many know people like this? If you tell me I have to believe that a dude was swallowed by a fish, I'm out. Then you have another group of people who say, if you tell me that a dude didn't get swallowed by a fish, I'm out. Right? You're telling me that story's not literal. If that story's not literal, I'm out. We find people in both camps. And what I want to do today is to just say, look, I have opinions about this. You have opinions about this. Everybody has opinions about this. Whatever. And this is the quote that I always come back to from Marcus Borg. Believe whatever you want. Believe whatever you want about whether or not these stories happen this way. Let's talk about what they mean. If we spend all of our time trying to decipher, did a dude get swallowed by a fish or did a dude not get swallowed by a fish? Do you see how we could spend hours and hours and years and spill lots of ink and spill lots of conflict with each other and nobody has any proof? Right? I mean, the only thing we can do to prove it is for one of us to get swallowed by a fish. Who volunteers? Okay, Austin, great. We're going to go down to the Green River after the service and we'll see. No, I get to pick the body of water. We're going down to the Green River. We'll get him swallowed by a fish. Anybody from Huntsville is being volunteered. So I don't know. I want to stay out of this territorial conflict. But yeah, so we're today not going to spend time talking about whether or not a guy got swallowed by a fish. Whatever your opinion is, I could not care less. It's totally fine. You do you. What I want to talk about is, what does this story actually mean? Let's begin with a little bit of just biography. Who is Jonah? Here's what's interesting. There's the book of Jonah that talks about this guy Jonah, a prophet. He appears one other time in the Bible. It's in 2 Kings, and this is his entire experience outside of the book of Jonah in the Bible. Jeroboam, the son of Israel's king Joash, became king in Samaria in the 15th year of Judah's king Amaziah, Jehoash's son. He ruled for 41 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's eyes. And kings, they tend to evaluate every king. Most kings do what is evil in the Lord's eyes. And very few kings, but some, like Hezekiah and Josiah, do what is right in the Lord's eyes. And here's what their criteria is based on. It's not based on how well the economy does or how many wars you win. It's based strictly and solely on how faithfully they lead the people to be true to their covenant with God. Like, are you doing that? Are you leading the people toward faithfulness? Jeroboam, he didn't deviate from all the sins that Jeroboam, Nebat's son, had caused Israel to commit. He reestablished Israel's border from Lebo Hamath to the Dead Sea. This was in agreement with the word that the Lord, the God of Israel, spoke through his servant, the prophet Jonah, Amittai's son, who was from Gath Hepher. That's it. That's Jonah. And it's apparently Jonah the prophet had made some sort of statement about how we need to take back our land and this king had went and taken back some land they had lost and restored the borders to the time of David. Right? This is what he does. So Jonah, if you read commentaries, the language they'll use about Jonah is that Jonah is a prophet. And by the way, a prophet is not a fortune teller. They don't have 1-800 numbers on TV that you can call. A prophet literally means someone who speaks for God. So Jonah was considered to be a prophet, and he was a nationalist prophet. And here's what that means. Jonah only cared about Israel. He didn't care about the people over here or people over here. He was all about his tribe. And Jonah, does that make sense now that you've listened to the book of Jonah? Who does Jonah care about? Israel. Jonah doesn't care about the Ninevites. Jonah doesn't care about anybody else. He does care about fish now, but he doesn't care about anyone else because Jonah is only about... And there are lots of prophets in the Hebrew Bible who sort of take that stance. Like, Israel's the only thing that matters, and we're going to kill all our enemies, and we're going to be the biggest kingdom ever. And then you have other prophets, though, like Isaiah. And Isaiah has this grand vision that on God's mountain someday, every tribe and tongue, even the Gentiles... You guys know how nasty Gentiles are, because we are them, mostly. All of us will be gathered on God's mountain. Everybody will find space at God's table. Like that's a dueling vision for the world in the Bible. Both exist. And we're being invited to wrestle with which one we think is the best way to live. This is all we got about Jonah. And then we come to the book that bears his name. It doesn't purport to be written by Jonah, right? It never says these are the words of Jonah. It just says, hey, there's this guy Jonah. The Lord's word came to Jonah, Amittai's son. Get up and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their evil has come to my attention. So God gives Jonah a mission. And what does Jonah do? So Jonah got up to flee. Right? How many of you have this child at home? Right? Get up and go clean your room. And suddenly they're gone. They've disappeared. They're hiding. Right? Jonah has been given a task. Jonah doesn't like the task. So he tries to run away from the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship headed for Tarshish. Here's sort of a map. Tarshish could refer to a couple different places. Most people think it refers to this location here, which is in Spain today. We would say Spain. So this is where Joppa is. Nineveh is 550 miles away from where Jonah is. And Jonah he's trying to go 2,500 miles in the opposite direction. Now, also most people say that we shouldn't take Tarshish too literally. It's a way of saying he's going as far away as he can possibly go. Right? I mean, if you were trying to think about as far away as you could possibly go, I mean, where would you go? For Jonah, it's Tarshish. Man, it's so far away. It's like being in another world. And so he's going to run away. He's going to get on a boat, and he's going to sail away, and he's going to avoid what he's been called to do. The place he's been called is Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, which was the dominant empire during Jonah's lifetime. It's the very same empire that in the year 722 would attack Israel and defeat them and exile them. And Judah still existed, the other two tribes, but 10 tribes of Israel that made up the country Israel were exiled and they ceased to exist. They never came home. They were never found. Like they just were dispersed into the world and forgotten. If you're Jonah, do you want to go tell Nineveh that they're going to be destroyed? Or do you want to sit back and watch the fireworks? You want to show up with some s'mores stuff, right? And just sit and roast your marshmallows over the fires of Nineveh because these are bad people. These people have it out for you. They want to destroy you. They want to destroy your home. They want to destroy your religion. They want to wipe you off the face of the earth. And your God comes to you and says, I want you to go, and I want you to tell the people of Nineveh that they've got to turn around. They've got to repent. They've got to change their minds. What do you do? Now, growing up in Sunday school, when they would have the felt board out and they would put the fish on there and Jonah on there, it seemed like a real clear decision. Jonah made a mistake, right? Jonah should have listened to God. How many of you would have listened to God? How many of us would have done that? How many of us would have said, okay, I'll go tell my worst enemy that they need to turn around or God's going to destroy them? No. Jonah is doing what any rational human being would want to do, which is leave your enemies for dead and hightail it out of there. And as we've come to find out, that this doesn't go really well for Jonah, because, and here's sort of, by the way, just to give you, this is Israel right here. Nineveh is right up in here. It's in modern-day Iraq, and Mosul is where the region Nineveh would have been in. But what about the fish? Like, that's what everybody wants to talk about, right? What about the fish? A couple things. God provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. He was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, here's what's interesting. The fish isn't the point. Right? And by the way, it's not a whale, right? Jonah, and I had Bible action figures. Did anybody else have those as a kid? Anybody else? Come on. It's okay. This is safe space. Safe space. Always felt weird. I had Jesus and you had to crucify him. It was weird, but you did it anyway because it's Bible action figures. I had Jonah and a big whale, and Jonah would fit inside the whale's mouth. And so you got to be God, right? And you got to let the fish eat Jonah and spit Jonah out. It just never says whale in the Bible. And actually the fish isn't the point. The fish is symbolic. Whatever you believe about how the story happened, the fish is symbolic of what happens when we miss the point. Fish isn't the point. The fish is what happens to us when we forget the point. And I love how Scott McKnight puts it. Missing the difference between God and the Bible is a bit like the person who reads Jonah and spends hours and hours figuring out if a human can live inside a whale. Anybody ever done that before? Like you're researching kinds of fish that could support human life for 3 days and 3 nights while submerged underwater. And I always had this vision of Jonah in the fish building a fire. Anybody else have this? Like he's in there, he's getting warm by the fire, the fish has got heartburn. Like it's like, you know, it's a real, I mean, it's just, really? And here's another interesting thing about the fish. In the Hebrew text, something happens in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is this poem prayer of Jonah to God, repenting and asking to be rescued. But here's what happens. At the end of chapter 1, end of chapter 2, it says this. Meanwhile, the Lord provided a great fish. It's the word dag gadol in Hebrew. A dag gadol. It's a masculine word. It's a male fish. God provided a boy fish to eat Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish, dag, which is, again, a male fish, 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God, from the belly of the fish. And here it changes to daga, which is the female word for fish. Jonah's in a male fish, Jonah's in a male fish, Jonah's in a female fish. What in the world happened to Jonah? There's no explanation. So, rabbis did what rabbis do, and they essentially try to fill in the gaps, right? This is what we do. When we don't have all the details, we essentially want to explain. And so in things like Midrash, which is a Jewish way of essentially filling in the gaps and interpreting the text, they talk about how that actually what happened is that there was a transfer of Jonah between two fishes. Fishes. And here's from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Thus, Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, but he would not pray. God then resolved to put him into another fish where he would be less comfortable. Because in the male fish, there was too much room. After all, he built a fire. Right? So they've got to... God didn't think this through, should have chosen a female, because if you want to get the work done, you got to call the woman, right? And so he decides we got to get him out of the male fish because the male fish isn't working out real well. We got to put him in a female fish. The female fish, quick with young, so she's pregnant, approached the male fish in which Jonah was, threatening to devour both unless Jonah were transferred to her and announcing her divine orders to that effect. And then Jonah was ejected from one fish into the overfilled belly of the other. Cramped for room and otherwise made miserable, Jonah finally prayed, acknowledging the futility of his efforts to escape from God. A lot happened between Jonah 1 and Jonah 2, friends. Jonah was ejected from the male fish, swallowed by the female fish, who was pregnant, and then I'm going to pray now, I guess. I got to get out of here. This is really, really interesting. Because what do we do when we don't have answers? We can either sit back and we can be depressed about not having answers, or we can creatively come up with them. And what they do in the Jewish tradition is midrash. It's interpretation. It's saying, this story exists. This story has mattered. What do we do with it? We interpret it. We seek to apply it. We seek to make sense of it. And so I just found that has nothing to do with my sermon. I just couldn't not share that because it's wonderful. And I also noticed this. Did you pay attention to every time it says God provided for Jonah? He provided a great fish. a shrub, which could also be translated a gourd, a worm, and a dry, hot east